Hey, what's up, you guys? Thank you for joining RPG Red Bull Galaxy. This is episode number 4, and today I want to talk about the similarities between hypergamy, the Blitzkrieg, and the Soviet Red Army. Now, of course, this dates back to World War II. In the Russian Federation, the European leg of World War II is known as the Great Patriotic War, which only started in 1941 and ended in 1945. Now, you might be thinking, why am I comparing the idea of hypergamy to the Blitzkrieg, and what does the Soviet Union have to do with it? Well, I get all these kinds of crazy ideas when I'm working out, and in fact, I just train back and rear delts. And usually what happens with me specifically is that I get my best ideas when I'm working out. I suspect it's because that when you're training, you're releasing all kinds of testosterone, endorphins, and hormones that's associated with well-being. And while it is fresh in your mind, you talk about it or you write it down. You're not going to wait an hour or two later, because what then happens later is that you forget stuff and other things take priority. So we all know that hypergamy is a woman's natural inclination to marry up, or if she does not choose to get married, to be around a man that is in a higher socio-economic position. So in other words, if she's here financially, if she's a receptionist, if she's a hairstylist, or if she's a content writer for a magazine, for example, that's fairly low level. Okay, she's probably going to want to find a man that's a managing director, or at least a mid-level manager making a lot more money than her, because that's just the hypergamous instinct. So let's just get down to it. Why am I comparing the hypergamous nature of women to the Blitzkrieg? Firstly, you have to understand what's the definition of the Blitzkrieg. Now, the Blitzkrieg, as it pertains to World War II, was the military tactics that the Wehrmacht, or the German army, used when they were invading initially Poland and other countries like France, Denmark, Lithuania, and then also finally the Soviet Union. The Blitzkrieg is a tactic of lightning-fast war. In other words, they would try to find out what the weakest point of the front line of the enemy was, and then in formation the military would go in with air support. In other words, fighter aircraft. The fighter aircraft would drop all their bombs to the weakest point, then followed by armored vehicles, which in this case were armored tanks, and these tanks, after the air support would drop their bombs, would then fire in one sequence their missiles into the front line of the enemy, break through the defenses, then make a circle around the enemy, and then finally the infantry, which would be the soldiers on the ground with the machine guns and rifles, would go in and finish off the enemy. Now, until 1939, this has never been done before. In World War I, we had trench warfare, which people would make very, very long lines in the sand. They would dig trenches and fight many long wars to gain just a few inches of ground. So with the Blitzkrieg, with air support throwing bombs, and then followed by armored vehicles, which would be the tanks, blasting their way through, making a circle around the enemy, and then sending in infantry, they were able to plummet country by country by country, and especially France, which defeated and humiliated Germany in World War I, that then drew up the Treaty of Versailles. They were then humiliated by Germany by means of this quick, fast, and lightning war. Now, how does this apply to hypergamy? Pretty much, as you can already see, the whole idea of the Blitzkrieg was to use more than one method of combat in unison, in harmony. So they did not only count on air support, they also had the armored vehicles, and in addition to that, they had the infantry as well. So you had at least 3 components of war working in sync at the same time. So what do women do? Women, particularly between the age of 18 to about 30, they use more than one application to their advantage. They're using the application of youth, beauty and sex. All right, now you might say to me, oh, come on, but women that are young, the youth and beauty is the same thing. No, it's not, because you get a lot of not so attractive women that are 1s, 2s, 3s out of 10. They're young, but they're not beautiful. These are typically what you call your femcells, your female incels. They're involuntary celibates. Now, these young women or girls, because they're quite young, they want to have sex, but they can't because either they're fat, they're ugly, or they're socially awkward. So they've got the youth, but they lack the beauty. And then you get women that are older, that are 40 plus. They're beautiful, maybe because they work out regularly, they're using the right kind of skincare, cosmetics, they eat healthy. So they've got beauty, and men want to sleep with them, but don't want to commit with them because they know that long term their longevity is not there. So you can be young and not beautiful. You can be old and beautiful, and that's not going to get you anywhere, at least from the perspective of a woman. So they use the combined applications of youth, of beauty, and sex. Now let me explain. A woman that is teasing you. Okay, a tease usually means that you're getting somebody sexually excited, but you've got no intention of actually going all the way. So you've maybe got an 8 or 9 out of 10. You met this lady at the bar. So what did she do? She used her youth and her beauty, because maybe she was wearing a mini skirt, a red mini skirt, and she had some cleavage sticking out, and she was smiling at you, and that enticed you to approach her. She used her youth and her beauty to get you to buy her free drinks, and she spoke to you flirtatiously, but then told you off. She told you that she only likes you as a friend, or she's not that kind of girl, when in fact she is. So she was using two fronts to her advantage. Okay, she was using youth, she was using beauty, but not sex. Okay, what about the women that are using all three applications at the same time, similar to the Blitzkrieg, where the Germans were using air support, armored vehicles, and infantry? So now you've got these women, they are using their youth, they're using their beauty, and they're sleeping with you, so you do get some pussy. Okay, typically these are the most dangerous women, because what they're doing is that they're using their youth, their beauty, and sex to get you addicted. And once you're addicted, they're expecting you to financially commit. So now they want you to buy them clothes, high heels, expensive vacations. When you go onto Instagram and you find all these so-called Instagram models, they will typically be posing next to expensive cars, 5-star restaurants, 5-star hotels, expensive vacations, etc. Who do you think is paying for all that? Now, yes, of course, we know that there are these girls, they pay $10 or $15 to go on a yacht ride, or they go on an expensive jet ski, and a lot of people don't realize that they just rented this jet ski, or they just paid for a 30-minute ride on an expensive yacht, and then they pretend like this is their lifestyle. You get those. But I'm specifically referring to the beta males that fall into the trap of financing the lifestyles of these women in exchange for sex, not knowing that this woman is using them as an accessory to financially cash in, and then drop these men by the curb as soon as they monkey branch upwards to someone higher. Okay, now not to go off topic here, this video is about hypergamy, how it is similar to the Blitzkrieg, okay, and how the Soviet Red Army then overcame the Blitzkrieg, and how you can use the same technique that the Soviets used to your advantage when women are using their beauty in a way that the Blitzkrieg was used. Okay, so let's go back. I said in the beginning that the whole premise of the Blitzkrieg was lightning fast war. So this was not meant to be a prolonged war. When Adolf Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, he foolishly believed that he was going to take Moscow in as little as 3 to 4 weeks. He said that this war, which culminated into World War II, was going to be over before the winter approached, because he understood that the Russian winter was very harsh, and this is why he came up with the Blitzkrieg, to hopefully be able to take out the Soviet Union in as little time as possible by utilizing this lightning fast war. What he didn't realize, however, was that the industrial capacity of the Soviet Union was so vast and so massive that that is partly one of the reasons why his Blitzkrieg came to an end. Okay, how can you use this to your advantage when it comes to women? Firstly, just as the Germans misunderstood or took for granted the military capacity and the production capacity of the Soviet Union, similarly, a lot of these young women do not take into account our capacity to produce. They do not take into account our capacity to withstand long wars. Okay, I said in one of my earlier videos, I think it was the third video, in a way I spoke about how hypergamy works against women. I said that most women have hypergamy working for them between the age of 18 to about 30, at which time, at the age of 30, they hit the wall and their beauty slowly starts declining, much like the Titanic started sinking in 2 hours and 40 minutes. All right. So what am I saying? They've got a maximum window of about 12 years and 12 years only. The Blitzkrieg was effective for a short time. It was highly, highly effective because they were able to just hammer country after country after country. And even in the beginning stage of the Soviet invasion, which was called the Battle of Barbarossa, in the initial phases in June of 1941, they were destroying the Russians. You know, they had many, many heavy losses. The Germans thought that they were going to crush the Soviet Union at the pace at which they were bombing and destroying the initial front lines of the Soviets. So what then happened was that at some point, the Soviets initially, they were shocked. They didn't know what was happening, and they were disorganized. The military didn't have their shit together. But over time, over this 4-year period, they started realizing that if they're not going to do anything, they're going to lose the war. So what did they do? Remember, the Germans invaded, from the Eastern Front. But on the far Eastern Front, Vladivostok and Siberia, those became the production centers. They just kept on producing, and their supply lines were very strong. They were out producing the Germans in terms of everything, in terms of food, in terms of manpower, in terms of military equipment, and also the speed at which these supplies could move. And what then happened was that this is not meant to be a lesson of the Second World War. This is meant to teach you how you can use the tactics of the Soviets, as they used it against the Blitzkrieg, how you can use this against women and have the upper hand. So at one of the battles, what then happened was that as the Blitzkrieg moved into the city, because of the rate at which these military equipment, etc., were moving, the amount of tanks that the Soviet had was so much greater, and also the Soviet Air Force was there to counter that of the Blitzkrieg. And because the Soviets were outproducing the Germans, it became known as a war of attrition. And because the Germans did not have the same amount of resources as that of the Soviet Union, and because the Soviet Union was just so much bigger and had so much more manpower, the Blitzkrieg was stopped right in its tracks, and they pushed the Germans back, ultimately to the point where the Soviet Union was outnumbering the Germans 3 or 4 to 1, if not more than that. Okay, some estimates say that the Soviets were actually outnumbering the Germans 10 to 1, but that's a subject of debate. So what am I saying here? In much the same way that the Blitzkrieg was a lightning fast war that had initial successes, that had initial devastating consequences for the Soviets, what happens with men and women is that young women, they are not aware that their window will come to an end at the age of 30. So their initial success, utilizing the combined applications of youth, beauty, and sex, in a very similar way that the Germans used air, land, and artillery attacks, they do not take into account this short-lived game, their short-lived war that they use on men in exchange for money is going to come to an end very quickly. what then happens is that myself, having been a beta blue-pilled male many years back when I didn't know what was going on, I was in a state of shock like a lot of men now waking up, okay? I was like the Soviet Union that was taken by surprise. I was like, oh fuck, you know, I thought this was my friend. I thought this person was on my side and I just got hammered, okay? Women using their sex appeal to get me to buy them shit, to pay for dates, pay for dinner, buy them things that they not get anything. So like the Soviet Union, I started waking up and I realized, okay, shit, so if their beauty, etc., comes to an end, not an end, but it starts declining rapidly at the age of 30, we as men, like the Soviet Union, can keep on going for so much longer. We can keep producing, manufacturing, making money, working on ourselves, becoming more resourceful, becoming more entrepreneurial, well into our 50s and even our 60s. If you don't believe me, look at Sylvester Stallone, look at Dolph Lundgren, look at Arnold Schwarzenegger. You know, they're in the 60s, some of them even in the 70s, and they're still looking good. And young women in the 20s still want to be with them. Now, these might be outlier positions, but it's just proof that it can definitely be done if you keep working on your grind, if you keep working on your purpose, okay? So those same women that took advantage of you when they were young, like with the Blitzkrieg, they had short-term, initial, lightning-fast successes, will then hit the wall in much the same way that the Soviets army was able to counter and push back the German Blitzkrieg, okay? So their game comes to an end at age 30, after which they slowly but surely declining, and we as men, we start increasing our industrial output, our economic, our physical, our mental, our emotional structures come together, and we can now look at them and say to them, look, you used me in the past when I was interested, when your beauty, when your sex appeal was at maximum, you ignored me, you friend-zoned me, you fucked Chad, you fucked Tyrone, and now that you're on the decline, you want to cash in on my resources that's going up? And the answer is no. Because now that I'm in my late 30s, I'm in my early 40s or 50s, I've got a lot more money, I've got a lot more charm, I'm emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically more developed, like the Soviet Union's military was, you know, at the peak of 1943 to 1945. Now you're interested? So what I'm going to do now that I've got a lot more resources and things going for me, I can now sleep with you, you know, drop you by the side and go for much younger women in their 20s. Guys, do you understand that the blitzkrieg of women is not going to last very long? It's a very short-lived affair that's going to give them initial successes, just like Nazi Germany had in the initial stages of the 1941 invasion of the Soviet Union. But because the Soviet Union had a much greater military and industrial capacity, it took them a while to wake up, but they did wake up. And if you're watching this video, then you are like what the Soviets were in the time when they were attacked by Germany. They were taken off guard. They were like, what the fuck? What just happened? This bitch just friend-zoned me. She just used me and I got screwed. But notwithstanding, I'm now able to tap into my resources, into my mental, physical, financial, spiritual deposits, and I can then expand my territory and I can stand up and go the extra 12 rounds. Guys, I hope this has been informative, and I'm sorry for this last minute change of plan. I just got this idea as I was working out, and I thought before I forget it, let me produce this video. This has gone on much longer than expected because I only produce videos of about 10 minutes or so. It's about 20 minutes, so I apologize, but I hope this has added value. Like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what else you want to see next. Cheers for now. Bye-bye.